Hi friends, continuing with the neurology series, today we will discuss subarachnoid hemorrhage. You can download the PDF of this lecture and attempt a free test on subarachnoid hemorrhage on the MediLectures app which is available on Play Store as well as iOS. We'll first go through the introduction, then what is saccular aneurysm, which is the most common cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage, then pathophysiology, clinical features, what are the delayed neurological deficits after subarachnoid hemorrhage, how to evaluate the patient by imaging and other lab tests, and finally the treatment. As the name implies, subarachnoid hemorrhage is the hemorrhage in the subarachnoid space, that is between the pia mater and arachnoid mater. So, what is the cause of this subarachnoid hemorrhage? Excluding head trauma, most common cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage is rupture of saccular aneurysm. And this saccular aneurysm is also known as berry aneurysm due to its characteristic berry-like shape. Now, when we consider the other causes of SAH, there can be bleeding from a vascular malformation, which can be a arteriovenous malformation or a dural arteriovenous fistula. Or rarely, there can be primary intracerebral hemorrhage, which can extend up to subarachnoid space. So, this is the image showing characteristic location of the hemorrhage in a patient of subarachnoid hemorrhage. This is the subarachnoid space and the blood is seen in the deep sulci of the brain, which is between the pia mater and arachnoid mater. Now we will be discussing saccular aneurysm in detail, as it is the most common cause of subarachnoid hemorrhage. That is, the rupture of saccular aneurysm is the most common cause which is responsible for subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now when we consider the mortality, the 1 month mortality of patients who reach the hospital alive is around 45%. That is, after subarachnoid hemorrhage, if the patient is alive, then the mortality within 1 month will be 45%. Now, the remaining patients who survive will suffer due to initial hemorrhage, cerebral vasospasm with infarction, or hydrocephalus. So these are the factors which will be responsible for the morbidity in a patient of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now, when we consider the annual risk of rupture of these saccular aneurysms, this depends on the size of the aneurysm. If the size is less than 1 millimeter, then the annual risk of rupture is around 0.1%, and if the size is more than equal to 10 millimeter, then it will be 0.5 to 1% risk of rupture annually. Now, what are giant aneurysms? When the diameter of the aneurysm is more than 2.5 centimeter, it is known as giant saccular aneurysm, and these are present in 5% of all cases of saccular aneurysm. Now, the most common locations, the three most common locations of saccular aneurysm are terminal internal carotid artery, middle cerebral artery bifurcation, and the top of basilar artery. Now, when we consider the risk of rupture in all three places, these are around 6% in the first year after the identification of these aneurysms. Now, if the rupture is not present, then also patient can be symptomatic because of the compression of the adjacent brain or cranial nerves by this aneurysm. Now, what are mycotic aneurysms? These mycotic aneurysms are due to the infected emboli due to bacterial endocarditis. So the infected emboli will arise from the infected walls present in bacterial endocarditis and lead to these mycotic aneurysms, and the location is characteristically distal to the first bifurcation of major arteries of the circle of Willis. Now the important point is that these infected emboli leads to septic degeneration of the arteries and subsequent dilatation and rupture. This can also lead to subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now coming on to the pathophysiology, saccular aneurysms occur at the bifurcation of large to medium sized intracranial arteries. Now the rupture into subarachnoid space in the basal systems and sometimes into the adjacent parenchyma of brain occurs. Now approximately 85% of aneurysms occur in the anterior circulation, mainly in the circle of Venus. A saccular aneurysm typically has a neck with a dome. So suppose this is a bifurcation of intracranial artery. So this saccular aneurysm or Berry aneurysm is having a neck and a dome. The length of neck and the size of dome vary greatly and are important factors in planning the neurosurgical treatment or the endosurgical obliteration, whichever is possible. Now when we consider the most common site of rupture, this is the dome. Why? Because there is thinning of media in the dome region of the aneurysm and the muscle is replaced by the connective tissue which is weaker. Now when we consider the risk of rupture, it depends on the size of the aneurysm and site of the aneurysm. So if the size is more than 7 mm diameter and the site is at the top of basilar artery or at the origin of PCOM, these aneurysms are at greatest risk of rupture. Now coming on to the clinical manifestations of this saccular aneurysm. Now most unruptured intracranial aneurysms are completely asymptomatic. So the symptoms are due to rupture and resultant subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now at the time of aneurysm rupture leading to major subarachnoid hemorrhage, there is sudden rise in intracranial pressure, and this rise in intracranial pressure is associated with sudden transient loss of consciousness in around 50% of patients. So there is sudden transient loss of consciousness which is present in 50% of patients of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now this loss of consciousness may be preceded by a brief moment of excruciating headache. So there can be preceding excruciating headache, but most patients will complain of headache on regaining the consciousness. Now when we discuss this headache in detail, around 50% of patients of ruptured saccular aneurysm will present with severe headache which is associated with exertion. So this is the presenting complaint in around half of the patients. Patients sometimes describe this as worst headache of their life. Most importantly, it is sudden onset. So the headache which is occurring gradually over 2 to 3 days or over months is not a feature of this subarachnoid hemorrhage. There should be sudden onset headache. The headache is generalized and is associated with neck stiffness and vomiting. So the triad of neck stiffness, vomiting without fever is characteristic of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and if this is associated with fever, then it is characteristic of meningitis. Now some patients present with headache with change in usual headache pattern. Now patients with SAH can also present with focal neurological deficits. For example, ACA or MCA bifurcation aneurysm can rupture into adjacent brain parenchyma, and if the hematoma is large, it can produce mass effect which can lead to hemiparesis, aphasia or abulia, that is mental slowness. Now prodromal symptoms are very important and this can give a clue towards impending aneurysmal rupture, and these are according to the location of aneurysm. For example, a patient can present with third nerve palsy associated with pupillary dilatation and loss of ipsilateral light reflex with present contralateral light reflex. There can be focal pain in eye. So this is present in cases of aneurysm at the junction of posterior communicating artery PCOM and internal carotid artery, that is at the junction of PCOM and ICA. Sixth nerve palsy can be there if the aneurysm is present in cavernous sinus. Visual field defect can be there in expanding supraclinoid carotid or ACA aneurysm. Occipital and posterior cervical pain can be present in cases of aneurysm in posterior inferior cerebellar artery or anterior inferior cerebellar artery. If there is pain in or around the eye and low temple region, there can be a expanding MCA aneurysm. So these all are the prodromal symptoms which can be present according to the site of the aneurysm. Now, thunderclap headache, it is a variant of migraine that simulates an subarachnoid hemorrhage. That is, pain is very similar to subarachnoid hemorrhage, but it is important to note that thunderclap headache term is used for migraine. That is, it is a variant of migraine. Now there can be sentinel bleeds, that is small ruptures or leaks of blood into the subarachnoid space. Now whenever a patient presents with sudden unexplained headache at any location, it should raise a suspicion of subarachnoid hemorrhage and should be investigated because major hemorrhage can be imminent. Now for grading of subarachnoid hemorrhage, we have two scales. First one is Hunt-Hess scale and second is World Federation of Neurosurgical Society scale. So it has grading of 1 to 5 according to the severity of headache and the mental status of the patient, or if any cranial nerve or motor finding is present. So this is present in cases of Hunt-Hess scale, and in WFNS scale we also take in consideration the Glasgow Coma scale. So it should be calculated in each and every patient of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Now delayed neurological deficits are very important in cases of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and the four major causes of these neurological deficits are re-rupture, hydrocephalus, delayed cerebral ischemia and hyponatremia. So we will discuss them one by one. First, re-rupture. The incidence of re-rupture is around 30% in the first month following subarachnoid hemorrhage. So after an episode of SAH, in 30% cases, patients, there is again re-rupture in the coming first month, but it will peak in first 7 days. So it will peak in first 7 days. It is important because it is associated with 50% mortality rate. Now the second reason for delayed neurological deficit can be hydrocephalus. Now this can be acute, subacute or chronic. Now acute hydrocephalus can lead to sudden stupor and coma in a patient of SAH, and the treatment includes external ventricular drain. Now subacute hydrocephalus develops over few days or weeks, and it is characterized by progressive drowsiness, slow mentation and incontinence. Now this can either clear spontaneously or may require temporary ventricular drainage. Now chronic will develop in weeks to months following SAH, and it is characterized by the triad of GUD, that is gait disturbance, urinary incontinence and dementia or altered mentation. Now delayed cerebral ischemia following subarachnoid hemorrhage is due to vasospasm. Now this vasospasm causes symptomatic ischemia and infarction in 30% cases, and it is due to the effects of clotted blood and its breakdown products. This also leads to decline in the mental status following SAH. So it usually, the signs of delayed cerebral ischemia usually appear 4 to 14 days following SAH, and the peak is at the 7th day, and it can be detected via conventional X-ray angiography, transcranial Doppler ultrasound and CT angiography. So conventional X-ray angiography is invasive and is associated with risk of stroke. The Doppler ultrasonography is dependent on the principle that velocity of blood flow will rise as the lumen decreases. CT angiography is a better alternative. Now, if the vasospasm is present along with severe cerebral edema, it will increase the intracranial pressure and will decrease the cerebral perfusion. So for this, we have to treat this condition by mannitol, hyperventilation, hypothermia, and for intractable cases, we can also use hemicraniectomy to relieve the pressure. So this was about the delayed cerebral ischemia. Now coming on to the last neurological deficit, that is hyponatremia. Now the cause of hyponatremia in patients of subarachnoid hemorrhage is both natriuresis as well as volume depletion. So natriuresis is due to atrial natriuretic peptide as well as brain natriuresis peptide. Now hyponatremia can be profound and can develop in first 2 weeks following the subarachnoid hemorrhage. So since there is both volume depletion as well as natriuresis, there will be hypovolemic hyponatremia. It will usually clear over 1 to 2 weeks, and it is important to note that free water restriction is never done in these cases, since the patient is already volume depleted and it can increase the risk of stroke. So for treatment, if required, we can give the patient salt and water, or we can also give hypertonic saline if the patient is very symptomatic. Now coming on to the lab evaluation and imaging. So the first and most important investigation is non-contrast CT scan. Now the more than 95% of SAH have enough bleeding to be detected by plain high quality non-contrast CT, which should be obtained within 72 hours. If the scan fails to establish the diagnosis of subarachnoid hemorrhage and there is no mass lesion present, then we can go for lumbar puncture. So before going to lumbar puncture, we have to exclude any mass lesion. Also, we have to exclude any obstructive hydrocephalus if present. So we do lumbar puncture because the hallmark of aneurysmal rupture is blood in CSF. We have to look for blood in CSF. Now this blood in CSF, due to lysis of red blood cells and conversion of hemoglobin to bilirubin, will give the characteristic yellow color to the CSF. This CSF becomes yellow and this is known as xanthochromia. So this develops in 6 to 12 hours, peaks, this xanthochromia peaks in intensity in 48 hours and remains for 1 to 4 weeks after SAH, remains for 1 to 4 weeks. Now, once the diagnosis of hemorrhage from a ruptured saccular aneurysm is suspected, we can perform 4-vessel conventional X-ray angiography, which includes both the carotids and both the vertebral arteries, or we can go for CT angiography. Now, these are performed to localize and define the anatomic details of aneurysm and to determine if another unruptured aneurysm exists. It also helps in planning the therapy. Now, cardiac testing is also important in cases of subarachnoid hemorrhage. When we do a ECG of the patient, there are characteristic ST segment and T wave changes which are similar to cardiac ischemia. Also, there is prolonged QRS complex, increase in QT interval, and peaked or deeply inverted symmetrical T waves. Now, these are due to circulating catecholamines and increased discharge of sympathetic neurons. This is due to mainly sympathetic nervous system, increased sympathetic supply. When we do the 2D echocardiography, there will be regional wall abnormalities, and it is important to note that this wall abnormalities will be following the distribution of sympathetic nerve rather than the major coronary arteries as seen with coronary artery disease. So these wall abnormalities will be in the distribution of sympathetic nerve. Now, asymptomatic troponin elevation is also seen in patients of SAH. So this is a non-contrast CT scan of the patient of SAH, and it is showing characteristically blood in the subarachnoid space, that is the sulcus of the brain, that is between pia mater and arachnoid mater. Now coming on to the last part, but very important part, that is the treatment. So there can be surgical as well as medical management of subarachnoid hemorrhage. First of all, for subarachnoid hemorrhage, neurosurgeon can do surgical clipping, and this requires craniotomy and brain retraction. So mainly a neurosurgeon will open the skull and retract the brain to clip the vessel which is bleeding. Now, due to this craniotomy and brain retraction, there is increased morbidity and mortality associated with this procedure. Alternatively, an endovascular surgeon can perform endovascular coiling. In this, platinum coils or embolic material within aneurysm is placed via a catheter that is passed from the femoral artery. So it is a less invasive procedure, and therefore coiling is preferred than clipping. Now when we consider the medical management, it is mainly dependent on airway, breathing, circulation. We have to prevent the rebleeding, managing vasospasm and delayed cerebral ischemia, treating hydrocephalus if present, treating hyponatremia if present, limiting secondary brain insults, and DVT prophylaxis of the patient. So we will discuss them one by one. Now, intracranial hypertension following aneurysmal rupture can occur secondary to subarachnoid blood, parenchymal hematoma, acute hydrocephalus, and loss of vascular autoregulation. So these are the causes of intracranial hypertension in patient following subarachnoid hemorrhage. So the patient usually present with stupor, and in this patient emergent ventriculostomy should be done to measure the intracranial pressure and treat if found high. So we have to do emergent ventriculostomy. If the patient following subarachnoid hemorrhage is found stuporous, we have to perform emergent ventriculostomy to measure the ICP. Then we have to maintain the adequate cerebral perfusion. If the patient is alert, the BP should be lowered to less than 160 mm mercury systolic BP via antihypertensives like nicardipine, labetalol, and esmolol. Now it is important to note that we have to also measure the ICP and maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure at 60 to 70 mm of mercury. Now seizures are usually uncommon in the patients of subarachnoid hemorrhage, but anticonvulsants can be given prophylactically because seizure can promote the bleeding in such patients. Now glucocorticoids can be given to decrease head and neck ache which is caused by the irritative effects of subarachnoid blood. Antifibrinolytic agents should be given in patients whom aneurysmal treatment cannot proceed immediately. Now giving these antifibrinolytic drugs will decrease the risk of aneurysmal rupture, but it should be noted that these are associated with increased risk of delayed cerebral ischemia and deep vein thrombosis. Now coming on to delayed cerebral ischemia. Now, this remains the leading cause of mortality and morbidity in patients of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and it can be treated via nimodipine, vasopressors, and intra-arterial vasodilators or percutaneous transluminal angioplasty. So, nimodipine can be given in a dose of 60 milligram orally every 4 hours, but it is associated with hypotension. So, if profound hypotension develops in a patient of vasospasm, it can worsen the cerebral ischemia and therefore increase the mortality and morbidity. So, in such patients, we can use vasopressors like phenylephrine or norepinephrine, or we can also give plasma volume exchange. We can increase the volume of such patients to prevent the vasospasm. Alternatively, intra-arterial vasodilators or percutaneous transluminal angioplasty can be done. Now, treatment of hydrocephalus, as we have already discussed, in acute cases who present with stupor or coma, it can clear spontaneously or may require temporary ventricular drainage, and in chronic cases, we have to do ventricular shunting, and this is the treatment of choice. So, ventricular shunting is the treatment of choice for chronic hydrocephalus. Now, coming on to the treatment of hyponatremia, free water restriction is contraindicated because it can lead to cerebral ischemia. So, what is the treatment of this hyponatremia? We can give supplemental oral salt along with normal saline, or we can sometimes use hypertonic saline. So, coming on to the last part, that is DVT prophylaxis. So, these are the general principles for DVT prophylaxis. We can use pneumatic compression stockings to prevent the pulmonary embolism. Now, unfractionated heparin can be initiated 1 to 2 days following successful endovascular treatment or craniotomy and clipping. But it should be noted that it is contraindicated in patients who have ruptured and untreated aneurysm, since it will increase the bleeding. So for such cases, we can use IVC filter till the definitive treatment with clipping or coiling is not done. We can use IVC filter, or if the clipping and coiling treatment has failed, so we have to not use such an unfractionated heparin in such patients, and it should only be used in successful clipping and coiling, that also 1 to 2 days after the surgery.